A lot more into the details here. I'm being joined right now by Fox 13's Craig Patrick. And Craig, once again, thanks for joining us at NewsNOW. And you know, a lot of the talk right now that the House impeachment managers have finished their arguments is, I was seeing that it was getting maybe a little too repetitive.
Well, they tried to establish a cause and effect. Their whole case was based on the premise that Trump incited an insurrection, one, by circulating false claims that his supporters, some of them, believed, and that he encouraged them to rise up in violence. That's why they went through the videos day by day. Cause, Trump said this, effect, showing this supporter in the mob or that supporter in the mob said something that mimicked or that parroted that. And that's the crux of it. They also got into the former president's intent and argued whether or not it will prevail when the senators vote. It's highly unlikely, but they presented the argument that the president's frame of mind was that he wanted the supporters to do what they did. And that's why they got into some of the other statements and press reports as well. And then they tried to put a bow on it today by making the case that there has to be removal of the former president from office, which one has already occurred. So two, banning him from serving again as a deterrent to other potential future presidents or future crowds that may be incited to violence as well. That's the argument, and that requires, to make the case, a good deal of repetition. The challenge they have is that a lot of members of the jury, including 45 Republicans who don't even think they have a legal authority to conduct it, have said repeatedly and on the record, yes, but we've seen all of this before. We were witnesses to it. We're not just the jury. We were at the scene of the crime and we saw everything that transpired. So you're not telling us anything that we don't already know. And that's why this is a very steep challenge for getting a conviction within the Senate.
Craig, you know, one of the major arguments that the managers were making was that essentially from about 1 to 3:30 in the afternoon on the 6th, you know, people were repeatedly calling for President Trump to call off the mob, essentially. But yet the impeachment managers kept claiming that he essentially, former President Trump, wasn't, you know, doing enough or wasn't doing anything, was kind of reveling in this, watching it on TV. But we don't really know what he was doing, and they couldn't essentially lay out and prove what he was doing because we just don't know. And so that's one of the reasons why some of that I've heard, some people want witnesses. They want to subpoena witnesses to get to the bottom of what exactly President Trump at the time was doing in that time frame. I found that to be interesting.
And the key witness would have been the former president himself. He declined to appear. So the question was, do House impeachment managers move forward, try to compel him? It would take you down the path of subpoenas. You would have a very arduous task of trying to bring other witnesses into the room as well. The House impeachment managers knew that that would take weeks upon weeks, if not months upon months, and there was no guarantees they would even prevail. Then the thinking was at that point among those arguing the case, would it even make any difference if we brought in the witnesses? They decided they wanted to move forward with what they had because they did not think that belaboring this over the course of weeks in the process that was not guaranteed to pay off for them would in fact move them any further along. And to that point, we all know, and the House impeachment managers therefore also know, the verdict is all but a foregone conclusion based on what we've already heard from enough Republicans. We're hard-pressed to find 17 Republicans who would vote with all the Democrats in order to get a conviction. So with this, the House impeachment managers are not just looking to the members of the jury, the senators in the room. They hope to try to pull off a miracle and try to convince 17 Republicans to join all Democrats, at least to try to get a conviction. But they're also arguing to the broader public, the court of public opinion. This is not a criminal proceeding in the Senate. And with that, if their thinking is that they need this to hold the former president to account, they don't want him to be able to seek federal office in the future because of it. If that's their goal, and it is, well, they can accomplish that perhaps without getting a conviction in the Senate if they convince and make their case in a compelling way to the general public. And I think that's why they're talking to a broader audience as well. And that does not necessarily require the process that would have taken weeks or months of bringing in witnesses, including the former president himself.
And just, you know, another point to make, Craig, how far has this testimony moved the needle? This is a game of inches, really, amongst Republican senators. Did it persuade any of them? Did it persuade any of the several that already voted and said, yes, the proceeding is constitutional? So that's another thing to look at. You know, obviously, I think it's a foregone conclusion that they won't get to 17, but will they, you know, the Democrats rather, gain to their side any of these holdout Republicans that you just don't know which way they'll vote yet?
Well, the maximum number by my count is 20. The maximum number of Republican senators that could conceivably vote to convict would be 20. They're going to be hard-pressed, and it's all but impossible to get that. Now, we see they've already moved the ball perhaps inches in the vote earlier this week over whether or not it was constitutional to put a former president on trial in the Senate for impeachment, because Cassidy perhaps was a mild surprise in voting with the 5 other Republican senators. So yes, if they may have moved the ball a couple of inches there, then it is certainly conceivable they could move it a couple of inches more. In terms of what we expect the final verdict to be, look for perhaps at least 52 of the 100 senators to vote to convict. That's a likely possibility, perhaps as many as 56. They could have then moved the ball a few more inches if you get to that point. You'd be getting into a real surprise if they move it beyond that. But what have we seen over the course of the past couple of years, for better and for worse in many different ways? There have been a great deal of surprises. So I think that they're holding out hope, but they're also clear-eyed as they wrap up their case as well.
Quickly, just want to talk about the former president's defense team. They'll take the rostrum tomorrow in the chamber. Do we think they'll use all 16 hours that they have allotted to them? Remember, I think it's safe to say they were kind of widely panned by both sides of the aisle when we first saw them in opening arguments. Bruce Castor, David Schoen, a lot of people said it was disjointed, it was meandering, it was a level maybe of unpreparedness. Even heard some reports the president himself, or former president rather, wasn't happy. What are you going to be looking for tomorrow when they take the stand?
It won't go 16 hours. You look for that. We've already heard that from the president's defense team. They have said there's a need for brevity on this. They don't want to belabor the points. They're going to make the case rather succinctly. They may well wrap up tomorrow and not take the full 16 hours, which could get us perhaps a vote and a verdict this weekend. And within that condensed period of time relative to what we saw the House impeachment managers present, in that condensed period of time, they will make the case primarily that the president had a right to free speech when he made his claims, as false as they may have been, that the election was stolen from him, and that he had a right to free speech to call on his supporters to fight like hell, because they will make the case that he was being figurative and not literal, despite what some may have interpreted his words to be. I think they may liken it to the cases and the controversies that are often drawn to whether or not real-life violence may have had a culprit in this video game or that television show or this movie or this speech from this person or that person. And they will say that it does cross a line, and they will argue to the end of their case that this comes down to a First Amendment case, a right to free speech. House managers recognize that. That's why they preemptively likened it to yelling fire in a crowded building when there is no fire, and saying that that doesn't cover you when you pose a threat to someone's health or safety. But we know what's coming from the Trump defense team, and we expect that to be a compelling enough case among enough Republicans that he will be acquitted.
Sorry about that. Many of those same Republicans do argue